My wife cheated on me once, and, to be honest, that was all it took. She probably thought she had everything under her thumb, that her little secret would stay hidden, but she couldn't have been more wrong. There weren't any glaring red flags before it happened, just the usual tale. After 15 years of marriage, the spark had pretty much fizzled out. We weren't really a couple anymore, just two people living in the same house, drifting further apart until we felt more like strangers than partners. Eventually, it dawned on me that what we had wasn't a marriage anymore. Not in any real sense. We weren't sharing anything meaningful, not our thoughts, and certainly not our bed. The distance between us kept growing, and then, little by little, she started leaving breadcrumbs. Small hints that things weren't quite right. I picked up on them after a while and confirmed what I dreaded. She was seeing someone else. At first, it seemed more like an emotional affair, but still, it was a betrayal. Her complaints about our relationship got louder, but they weren't anything I hadn't heard before. For years, I'd tuned out her endless nagging, her constant criticisms. But this time, I found myself really paying attention because now I had proof. She didn't just seem unhappy with me. She was done pretending otherwise, falling out of love, and not even bothering to hide it. I knew that trying to convince her she was wrong or telling her we could fix this wouldn't work. It'd just push her further away. I could see it, the cold detachment in her eyes, whatever tiny connection we had left slipping away. So I thought, to hell with it. I nursed a beer, thinking back over our latest argument, desperate to figure out some way to win her back. I kept telling myself she was still my wife, but the harder I tried to hold on, the more distant she became. While she slept soundly in our big, empty bed, I stayed up late, wrestling with my thoughts. Somewhere in that fog of frustration and hurt, a different idea started taking shape. Why was I even fighting her on this? Why was I trying so hard to prove her wrong about her own feelings? Then it hit me, I was the fool here. Her feelings were real to her, and there I was, insisting she was mistaken. How absurd is that? You can't argue with someone about how they feel. So why was I wasting my energy trying? Right then, I decided it was time to stop. The next question was, what did I feel? And as I sat there alone in the dark, it clicked. I wasn't happy either. In fact, I wasn't sure I even loved her anymore. Not in the way that counted. What I'd been holding on to wasn't the reality of us. It was just a memory of a marriage that no longer existed. That realization was like flipping a switch. As the pieces fell into place, I began crafting a plan. Whether it worked or not hardly mattered because what we were doing sure as hell wasn't working. They say insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. I chuckled to myself, tossed my empty beer bottles in the recycling bin, and decided to crash in the guest room that night. It wasn't long before Samantha came into the guest room, flipping on the light and flooding the room with that glaring brightness. I squinted, adjusting my eyes. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. I blinked, shrugged, and said, "Stayed up late. Didn't want to bother you." She gave me a quick glance before heading off to the kitchen to make her coffee. Never needed that stuff myself. I could just get up and go. That day, as I showered and got dressed, I felt this strange, new energy, like a burden had been lifted from my shoulders. That evening, Samantha perched across from me in the living room while I settled into my usual spot on the couch. She looked tense, hands clenched like she was bracing herself for something difficult. After a moment, she took a deep breath. "Arthur," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "This isn't working. I'm confused, frustrated, and I don't think I love you anymore." I sat quietly, just watching her push through whatever this speech was. Then, after a long pause, she finally dropped the real bomb. "I think we should get a divorce." The word hung in the room, heavy and loaded, but instead of reacting with shock or anger, I just smiled. Her eyes widened, clearly thrown by my response. "That sounds fine," I replied, keeping my tone calm. She blinked a few times, as if trying to process whether she'd really heard me right. "Arthur, did you actually hear what I said?" I nodded. "Yeah, I heard you. You're saying this marriage isn't working for you, that you don't love me, and that you want out. I get it. You agree." She looked genuinely taken aback, like she'd expected a fight. I stood up, crossed the room, and knelt down in front of her. Samantha, how could I argue with you about how you feel? If you're telling me you don't love me anymore, then what's left for me to say? Honestly, I get it. I've had plenty of moments where I felt nothing for you, too. So, if this is what you want, I'm not going to hold you back. For the first time, her expression softened with something close to surprise. Wait, you didn't love me at times? She looked genuinely rattled, like this wasn't how she thought the conversation would go. I shrugged slightly, offering a faint smile. Just like you, I said. Her face twisted, a mix of frustration and confusion showing. Like she'd rehearsed this moment but hadn't counted on me not playing my part. Watching her fumble for words, I found myself a bit amused. After a long silence, I finally said, well, is that everything? Because I've actually got plans tonight, and if you're finished, I'd like to get going. You're planning on moving out soon, right? I grabbed my jacket from the hallway. Wait, Arthur, where are you going? She asked, her voice a bit desperate now. Out, I said, keeping it casual. Figured I'd hit up a few bars. No time like the present to start moving on. I gave her a quick wave as I left, catching the look of shock still frozen on her face. I ended up at this quiet old bar and ordered a bourbon, finding a table alone in the corner. That's where I started putting the next part of my plan into motion. I dialed up Lily, a coworker who was always eager for the latest gossip, and gave her the story of the devastated husband blindsided by his wife's sudden announcement. I made sure to lay it on thick, painting the picture of Samantha dropping the news out of the blue. The official reason I gave Lily for calling was to say I might not make it into work the next day since I was drowning my sorrows alone. But in truth, I knew exactly what I was doing. I could practically hear Lily's mind spinning with curiosity. She and I had flirted a little here and there at the office, and I knew she was single, so I figured this call would catch her interest. Sure enough, she didn't miss a beat, suggesting she could come keep me company through this rough night. I took her up on the offer and proposed we meet at a lounge Samantha and her friends frequented. Was I worried about Samantha seeing me? Not in the slightest. As far as I was concerned, our marriage had already ended, and whatever feelings I'd had for Samantha were long gone. Lily arrived looking sharp but with a slightly rushed appearance, like she'd hurried over, wanting to be the first to hear my side. The moment she settled in beside me, though, I could tell she wasn't buying my act as the heartbroken husband. My expression must have given me away. The smile on my face didn't match the story I'd spun over the phone. Arthur, what's going on? She asked, suspicion in her voice as she scanned my face. I lifted my hand, showing her the bare spot where my wedding ring used to sit. She asked for a divorce. It's what she wants, so why should I fight it? I waved over the waiter for another round, and Lily ordered her usual cosmopolitan, still watching me closely. But you sounded so torn up on the phone, she said, looking genuinely confused by the shift in my attitude. I just shrugged. Lily, we've both been miserable for a while. Honestly, I don't think I feel anything for her anymore. Not like before. She wants out, and that's fine by me. I'm not going to wallow in self-pity. Lily sipped her drink slowly, studying me, as if trying to figure out what this new version of me was all about. I could sense that my attitude was throwing her off, maybe even intriguing her a bit. Whatever this new outlook was, it seemed to have her attention. Care to dance? I asked, not even waiting for her response before taking her hand and guiding her onto the dance floor. Arthur, what are you going to do? She asked softly as I pulled her close. I met her eyes and replied, I'm going to give her exactly what she wants. And then, I'm going to do whatever I want, which right now is dancing with you. I held her gaze. I've wanted to for a while, and now I finally can. She looked up at me, a gentle smile forming on her lips. If this is just to get back at her. She trailed off, watching me closely, trying to gauge my intentions. I raised an eyebrow. And if it is? I said, letting the question hang in the air. She leaned in, pressing her body against mine, and whispered, I'm fine with that. Time seemed to blur as we danced, and for the first time in years, I felt completely untethered. No checking the clock, No need to report back to Samantha. Lily was fun, sharp, and she knew exactly how to keep the banter light and engaging. There was a spark between us that felt effortless. And though she was clearly ready to take things further, I didn't. Knowing she was interested was enough. After Samantha had torn down my pride, Lily was there, building it back up without even trying. And, to be blunt, Lily was a lot more attractive than Samantha. Later, out in the parking lot, we shared a quick kiss by her car. I helped her inside and smiled. "See you at work tomorrow?" I said with a wink. She nodded, understanding that I wasn't rushing into anything serious but open to having a good time. By morning, word would spread all over the office that I was single again, thanks to Lily's knack for spreading the latest gossip. And to be honest, I was kind of looking forward to Samantha hearing about it, too. When I got home, Samantha was waiting for me. She'd been in bed, but the sound of the door must have made her rush out to meet me. "Where were you?" she demanded, her tone tight with irritation. I shrugged out of my coat, taking my time as I started to undress for bed. "Out," I replied flatly. "I told you I was going out. Why do you care?" "Arthur, I was worried," she said, her voice softening unexpectedly. "I thought you might have done something reckless." I couldn't help but smirk at her sudden concern. "Samantha, I get it. I know where you stand, and I'm fine with it. You want a divorce, and I'm not going to fight you. I'd never want you to stay in a marriage with someone you don't love anymore." I grabbed my pillow and a change of clothes, ready to head back to the guest room without another word. "Arthur," she called out, her voice hesitant as I reached the door. I stopped, adjusting the pillow and clothes in my arms. "What is it?" I asked, turning back to see her. She looked down, her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "You don't have to sleep in the other room, you know," Samantha murmured softly, her tone barely above a whisper. "Oh? Are you offering to take the guest room yourself?" "Then," I asked, making it clear I wasn't going to let her slide out of this situation so easily. She gasped, her eyes brimming with tears as she tried to hold herself together. "That's not what I meant. If you want, you can stay in our bed. If you don't, I guess I could take the guest room." She was flustered, clearly thrown off balance. The idea of actually giving up her spot in our bed had probably never even occurred to her until now. I decided to put her out of her misery. "Fine," I said, tossing my pillow back onto our bed. "This mattress is more comfortable anyway. I'll stay, as long as you're sure it won't be too much of a burden for you." Her face brightened instantly. "No, no trouble at all," she said quickly, clearly relieved. "Good then," I replied, settling in, though I could see she wasn't ready to let the conversation go just yet. But I was exhausted and had no interest in talking further. I told her we'd discuss things another time and switched off the light. By the next afternoon, the word had spread around the office, and I'd already had 3 women approach me, each with their own interest in my newfound single status. Even one of my buddies slipped me his sister's phone number, telling me she was a widow struggling to find someone to date. I ended up setting up dates for the following week with all 4 of them, including a second night out with Lily. Tonight, though, I kept my schedule open. I knew I had to sit down with Samantha and sort things out. It was about time she started moving on, too. When I got home, there was Samantha, waiting for me with a look that could cut glass. She was livid. "Amber saw you last night at the lounge," she snapped, her voice shaking with anger. "She told me you were there with some woman. Who was she, and what were you doing? Amber said you two looked pretty cozy." It would have been easy to let loose, to remind her of all the times she'd gone out with other men, leaving me in the dust, growing colder with each day. But instead, I just gave her a smile and said I'd answer her questions after I changed. She tried pressing me, demanding an answer, but I ignored her, heading to the bedroom to change out of my work clothes. When I came back, she was still standing there, stiff as a board, her eyes red and watery, her whole body tense and ready for a fight. "That was Lily from work," I said plainly, not even trying to hide it. I could tell she'd expected me to dodge the question, maybe even lie. "What were you doing?" she demanded, her voice strained. I met her gaze, calm and steady. "We were on a date." Her face twisted in shock. A date? She echoed, disbelief flooding her voice. I nodded, keeping my composure. Yes, a date. You have no right, she yelled, her voice rising to a shriek. We're married. What makes you think you can just do that? I got up, walked to the kitchen, grabbed a drink, and then sat back down, keeping my cool. Samantha stayed where she was, staring me down, waiting for an explanation. Why does it matter? I asked evenly. Her jaw dropped, her eyes wide. We're married, she repeated, as if that settled everything. You want a divorce, don't you? I asked, watching her closely. She nodded, though she looked like the words were lodged in her throat. And you said you don't love me, right? I'm not in love with you, she corrected, her voice barely more than a whisper. Exactly, Samantha. You're not in love with me, and I'm just agreeing with you here. So tell me, why shouldn't I try to find love elsewhere? You want out, and you've made it clear your feelings are gone. What reason would I have to stay? She sank into a chair, looking as if she'd been blindsided. But what will people think? She muttered, dazed. Do you realize how this looks? Amber's already telling half the town that my husband was seen out with some other woman. I narrowed my eyes. Don't you dare throw insults at Lily, I said, my tone low and serious. She's been nothing but respectful, and I was nothing but a gentleman. She went out with a married man. Samantha spat, seething with anger. That makes her a 304. I stood up and began pacing slowly in front of her, letting her own words settle in the air. If that's what you call a woman who goes on a date with a married man, then what would you call a married woman sneaking around with other men while she still has a husband at home? Samantha froze, her mind clearly racing. I could see her working through the implications, her face betraying her worry as she tried to figure out how much I actually knew. What does that have to do with anything? She stammered, her voice shaky. I just stared at her, letting the silence draw out, watching as the weight of my words sank in. Her shoulders began to tremble slightly, and I could see the panic rising in her eyes. How much do you know? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Enough, I said quietly, meeting her gaze. Whether or not you actually went through with it doesn't even matter to me anymore. What matters is that you shut me out a long time ago. The moment you did that, our marriage ended. I'm not going to waste my time mourning something that's already gone. I'm moving on now, taking care of myself since I clearly don't have a wife who cares to do that anymore. I got up and headed into the kitchen. There was no dinner waiting, but I didn't mind. I made something quick for myself, all while feeling Samantha's eyes on me as I finished my meal. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. I cleaned my plate, then turned to her. I'm sorry too. Just so you know, I've made plans for the rest of the week. Don't expect me home until late. And if you'd prefer, I can sleep in the guest room. She didn't answer, so I headed upstairs, deciding to sleep in the guest room for the night. I had a feeling she wouldn't get much sleep herself. The next evening after work, I met up with Ruby. She was a lovely woman in her mid-30s, blonde, divorced with 2 kids. We started with a coffee and then spontaneously decided to play laser tag. 2 adults up against a team of teenagers. They wiped the floor with us every single round, but Ruby was having a blast, laughing so hard that it was contagious. Between rounds, we sat and chatted, enjoying the downtime before the next game. During the last match, we both got shot side by side and dramatically pretended to collapse. As we lay there, I pulled her close and kissed her. She smiled and kissed me back. After that, we shared a nice dinner together, and I walked her back to her place. We kissed for a while by her door, but she didn't want to rush into anything, asking me to promise that we'd go out again soon. I happily agreed, more than content to take things slow. When I got home, I half expected Samantha to be waiting with another outburst, but instead, she seemed strangely composed. Hi, she greeted me quietly as I walked in. I gave her a slight smile, starting to undress. Hello. You seem like you had a good time, she observed, trying to keep her tone neutral. I did, I replied, glancing in her direction. Thanks for noticing. How was your evening? For the first time in months, we actually sat down and talked. Really talked. We stayed up most of the night, finally letting out all the things we'd kept buried. I listened to her and, for once, she actually listened to me. I never slept with anyone, Arthur. I swear, Samantha said, her voice trembling with emotion. I kissed a few men, yes, and I got close with Derek at work. But that's as far as it went. He wanted more, but I couldn't go through with it, she added, her voice shaky. I took a deep breath. Samantha, we're both at fault for how things have ended up. Maybe you didn't go all the way, but you still betrayed me, emotionally. We were supposed to be partners, a team. I paused, letting that settle between us. I do respect that you pulled back before actually asking for a divorce, though. And maybe I should have listened more, instead of always trying to argue my way out of every problem. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yeah. We sat there in silence, the weight of everything we'd been through filling the space between us. After a while, she broke the silence. Arthur, I don't think I really want a divorce anymore, she admitted, her voice uncertain, almost like she was testing the idea out loud. I gave a small smile. Take the time you need to figure that out. I'm not pushing you out, and I'm not planning on leaving either. Arthur? She asked softly as I got up to head to bed. Are you still going to see Lily? She asked, her voice uncertain, though I could tell she'd been dreading the answer. Yeah, I'll still see her. And others, too. You need to do whatever helps you sort things out, Samantha. I'm doing what's best for me now. If it leads to divorce, then maybe that's how things were meant to go. I moved toward the guest room, knowing she wouldn't let the conversation end there. She followed, stopping in the doorway. Arthur? She called out softly as I started pulling off my shirt, clearly searching for the right words. I turned to her. What is it? Come back to bed with me, she said, her voice unsteady, almost pleading. Please. I hesitated, feeling the weight of her request. I don't think I want that anymore. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked completely lost. I don't know. I just want you right now, she murmured, her voice breaking. Without thinking, I opened my arms, and she stepped into them, overcome with emotion. She sobbed, confused and vulnerable, and I led her back to our bed, holding her close as we drifted into an uneasy sleep, both of us tangled in the uncertainty of it all. The following evening, I went out with Melanie, an old friend of mine. She was a self-proclaimed geek, and we'd bonded over our favorite shows and shared interests in fan culture. She'd been wanting to check out this dive bar with live music that her other friends weren't interested in, so I offered to go with her. We had a fun night together, though it was strictly platonic. Despite some harmless flirting here and there at work, there'd never been any romantic spark between us. We wrapped up the night early, just as friends. When I got home, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked in the driveway. For a brief moment, a pang of jealousy hit me, but I quickly let it go. My therapist had once taught me a simple mantra to cope with my anxiety about flying. Everything will be what it will be. I let that thought settle my mind as I walked inside. Samantha was sitting in the living room with her friend Amber when I walked in. Arthur, I didn't expect you back so early, Samantha said, clearly surprised to see me. Samantha, Amber. I greeted them both with a nod, but Amber's eyes were shooting daggers my way, saying nothing. Things wrapped up sooner than planned, so I'm home, I replied. Do you two want some privacy? Samantha glanced over at Amber, who stood up, clearly ready to make her exit. I should get going, she muttered, giving me one last look filled with resentment before heading out. Sorry if I interrupted anything, I said once Amber was gone. Don't be ridiculous, Arthur. This is your home too, Samantha replied, though the word home felt like it had lost its meaning a long time ago. Home, I repeated almost to myself. When was the last time either of us had truly called it that? Have you eaten? She asked, nodding at the leftovers from her dinner with Amber. I picked at a bit of food while she moved around the kitchen, tidying up. How are you? I asked, sensing she had something more on her mind. I'm fine, I guess, she said, sitting down. I invited Amber over to talk, but honestly, She just left me feeling more confused. Oh, I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to explain. She said I should kick you out, change the locks, and just go through with the divorce. I chuckled. Well, my key still works, so I guess you haven't called the locksmith yet. She let out a small laugh, and for a brief moment, things felt almost normal between us. I had to remind Amber that I'm the one who asked for the divorce, Samantha continued, her tone softening. After I told you how I felt, what right do I even have over you now? I'm the one who let go, didn't I? She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for answers, as if she was desperate for some clarity. I dodged the question, steering the conversation elsewhere. Bad news. I had a date planned for tomorrow night, but it got canceled. Now I'm stuck with concert tickets. Interested in going? Her face brightened, surprised. Oh, Arthur, I'd love to go. If you really want me to. I shrugged nonchalantly. Be ashamed to let them go to waste. Maybe I'll just pass them to someone at work. No, she blurted out, a bit more emphatically than I expected. I mean, I'd be happy to go. Happy to go with me? I teased, raising an eyebrow. She blushed, nodding. Yes, I smiled. Could be fun. The next day, I had to let Paige know that our date was off. She seemed disappointed, but that's just the way dating goes sometimes. When I picked Samantha up after work for the concert, it was clear she'd put in some extra effort to look her best, and I had to admit, it worked. She looked fantastic. I wasn't too familiar with the band, since Paige had recommended them when I bought the tickets, but they turned out to be pretty good. Loud but good. It wasn't exactly surprising when we bumped into Paige at the concert. Samantha, though, looked taken aback when she saw her. She must have figured out pretty quickly that Paige would have been my date for the night if things hadn't changed. I offered a quick apology to Paige, who gave Samantha a sharp look. Paige, this is Samantha. Samantha, this is Paige. I introduced them, intentionally leaving out the fact that Samantha was my wife. She was supposed to be my date tonight, but plans shifted. Samantha didn't miss a beat. Paige, nice to meet you. I'm Mrs. Baldwin, she said, locking eyes with Paige in a way that spoke volumes. Paige, quick on the uptake, excused herself, saying she'd catch me at work tomorrow. As soon as she was out of sight, Samantha grabbed my hand, visibly upset. Arthur, where's your wedding ring? I shrugged. Took it off after you asked for a divorce. Figured I didn't need it anymore. Samantha was momentarily speechless. I had to admit, there was something a bit satisfying about watching her scramble for words. Arthur, we aren't divorced yet, she finally managed, trying to assert some control. I just smiled and turned my attention back to the music, letting her sit with that thought. Throughout the night, I made a few trips to the bar for drinks, and every single time, I could feel Samantha's eyes on me, watching my every move. Each time, some woman would strike up a conversation, and I'd chat back, keeping things light and playful. One even laughed so hard at a joke that she slipped me her number. Samantha saw it all unfold, but she didn't say a word. I wasn't exactly a ladies' man, but I could turn on the charm when I wanted. And now that Samantha had already asked for a divorce, I finally felt free to flirt without that gnawing guilt or the feeling of being bound by our strained relationship. As the night went on, I turned to her and said, Since you've changed your mind, I guess I don't need this anymore to protect me. I held her gaze, making sure she grasped the significance of what I was saying. When the time is right, you'll know what to do with it. I walked over, placed the wedding ring in her hand, and gently closed her fingers around it. I stepped back, watching as she took it in, the weight of the gesture unmistakable on her face. Later, as I was drifting off to sleep, her voice broke the silence. Arthur, she called softly. Thanks for tonight. I actually had a good time. You're welcome, I murmured, slipping back into sleep. The next morning, I woke to an unexpected sight, breakfast already prepared. Samantha had scrambled some eggs and cooked up bacon. Simple, but more than I'd expected. She'd never really been one for cooking, so the effort didn't go unnoticed. As I sat down, I noticed her still wearing her wedding band and engagement ring. She fiddled with them, twisting them nervously as she picked at her food, a small sign that she was struggling to hold on. Later that morning, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call. Amber, I answered, surprised. Didn't expect to hear from you. What's up? Lunch today, 12:30 at the Olive Grove, she said curtly, then hung up without waiting for my response. I stared at the phone, trying to decipher what that abrupt invitation was all about. Amber was one of Samantha's friends from work, and while she'd never been particularly warm toward me, she was the last person I expected to be calling for lunch. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat, that much I could sense. When I arrived at the restaurant, Amber was already seated, her face tight and serious. I'd been right, this wasn't going to be pleasant. I ordered, and she wasted no time getting to the point. What the hell are you doing, Arthur? She demanded, her tone sharp and accusing. Samantha's in agony, and you're out there parading around with other women right in front of her, acting like you couldn't care less. Her words stung, and for the first time in a while, I felt a flash of embarrassment and anger. But I bit my tongue, knowing that anything I said would likely make its way back to Samantha. I took a deep breath, steadying myself under Amber's sharp gaze. Finally, I spoke. Amber, how much do you really know about what's going on with Samantha? I know her husband is acting like a complete jerk. She shot back, loud enough that nearby tables turned to glance our way. Cut the crap, Amber. Answer me honestly, and I'll do the same. I've got nothing to hide. Can you say the same? I leaned back as our food arrived, watching her carefully as she tried to regain her composure. She fiddled with her glass, her tone dropping to a quieter level. Samantha's confused, she admitted reluctantly. So confused that she needs to spend time with other men to figure things out? I countered, raising an eyebrow. Amber flushed and took a long sip of water. She had a few weak moments, Arthur, she muttered defensively. Sure, I bet she did, I replied, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. And I'm guessing you and her friends have been there to help her through it, right? That's right.